One of the questions that I got was, how do you mix electric guitars and make them sound massive? After producing for well over a decade and working with rock and metal artists and coaching over 1,000 students at this point in time, I have found that there are really just two things that people do to their guitar tones that absolutely kill them during the mixing process. And when you mix it right, it can sound like this. Let's take a listen to what these guitars sound like by themselves. So first, I am double tracking these guitars. I have one on the left, one on the right, and the guitar is intonated very well. I'm not copying and pasting this down. I am making sure that I'm doing two separate performances. Your guitar tone starts at your performance. If you don't nail the performance, the guitar tone is going to be way off. I was just working with one of my students, and he was really trying to dial in his guitar tone. After we spent some time dialing in his guitar tone, all of a sudden his mistakes were being revealed, and he realized he had to go and re-record a lot of his guitars because all of that gain and everything else that was going on in his guitar tone was hiding the fact that the performance was a little bit lackluster and he needed to go back and re-record it. So he went back, re-recorded it with that new guitar tone, and things really changed for him. So we always start at the performance of the instruments. We want to make sure we're consistent, and we want to make sure that we're in time and we are tight. And you can go through and you can even time align things here. You can see that these chugs specifically, I really wanted tight. So they are really tight. I'm actually going in and I'm adding bend markers to time align those. Once we've gone in and we are making sure that we are performing our parts right, our guitar is intonated, it's got fresh strings on it, and it sounds great, then we can go and we can start with the guitar tone. Now, here's the thing that's going to blow most people's minds. Everything that you're hearing right now is pretty much mixed, done. I set it out this way, and yet there's not a whole lot on it. Take a look. So we have these guitars. They sound great. We've performed these well. I am using Archetype Nolly specifically for these guitar tones. And then to mix it, I have nothing. Nothing is on here. It's just that. That's it. Like, this is my guitar bus, and nothing's on the bus. These are the individual guitars. Nothing is on it. Everything that is great about these guitars is extremely tight and consistent takes and working at a really good tone. So I'll break down the tone, how I'm building this, but I really just want to dial this in. Now, let's dial in the guitar tone and figure out exactly what it takes to get a great guitar tone like this. So first, I want to go in and I want to adjust some things specifically. I want to go ahead and I want to choose a specific amp and then a specific cab. These two things are going to be a really big factor in the overall tone of the guitar. It'll shape everything. The difference in the cab will have a bigger impact than any EQ you could throw onto it afterwards. So what I do is I always go ahead and I just delete everything from here. Just the amp and the cab is the only thing that I want. So I go ahead and I remove a lot of this stuff. So just the amp and the cab is all I'm interested in. And I want to start dialing in a guitar tone that I'm really, really happy with. Let's start off with making sure that we're finding a guitar tone that we actually are really after and we really like. Specifically, this guitar tone, I was looking for that more modern metalcore sound that sounds very similar to Poppy and Amira Alfeki, which I really enjoy. There's a lot of low end and low mids to this guitar tone, and it felt very modern, very polished, and it was something that I really enjoyed a lot. And so I wanted to start with the intention of the direction I wanted to go with the tone. If I was going for more Thal-like tone, like Throne, I would not use this guitar tone. So the guitar tone we choose is completely relevant to the direction we want to go with our song. And so because I wanted to do the Amira Alfeki and the Poppy genre in that route, I wanted to have some room in the low end and the low mids. So immediately I'm grabbing my amp here and I'm using the third amp here, which is essentially a 5150. And then I unlinked the cabs and I'm going through and I'm selecting different cabs. I liked this one specifically because of the low end, but take a look. So it was really coming down to the last cab, cab number 4 or cab number 1 for me, and I ended up choosing cab number 1 because it did have that high-end sizzle that I liked with some low end that was really working really well. And I went ahead and I adjusted some of the bass to bring in some of that low end as well. That's a lot of low end. I'm talking a lot of low end. Most people would initially go and start cutting everything out below that. But it's thinning up my guitar and it doesn't work. I want that really nice thick guitar tone. And so having this EQ on just doesn't work. You're probably thinking, does it fight with the bass and everything else? Not really. I mean, you heard it. It sounded great. Everything sounded like it was fitting really well. The kick was cutting through, the bass was cutting through, all the other stuff was cutting through just fine. So if it sounds good, it is good. We don't need to go through and cut the stuff out because we think it's fighting. We are absolutely 100% allowed to have overlapping frequencies between our guitars, our synths, our bass, and everything else. That's part of how music is made. You only start cutting those if they become an issue. And I would say if your guitar tone is getting in the way of your bass tone and your drums, then you probably just want to go to the tone themselves and figure out what cab you're using. Maybe use a cab that doesn't have as much low end, or use a cab that maybe is a little bit more prominent in the mid range where the bass isn't. I typically don't like to use a whole bunch of EQ to shape my guitar tone. I would rather shape it at the actual guitar tone section itself. So here on the amp and then here down with the cabs. So already I'm feeling really good about this. Let's go to the cab and I want to adjust the microphone to get that low end that I'm looking for without any of that like super high end sizzle. So the high end sizzle is there, but there's also some low end that's there. It's giving me a bit of bite I like in the mid range. Notice how me just adjusting that microphone is doing so much to the overall sound of this. Most people, once again, would go to an EQ, but if you start here, you start where it matters, it just makes your life so much easier during the mixing process. So now that I've got this tone that I'm looking for, I got that high-end sizzle, I got that low-end that I'm looking for, I've used my reference tracks well, now I can start going in and I can start tightening some things up. I do want to add a bit of a drive to this just to tighten it up, and my personal hack I like to do a lot is I turn the drive knob down but bring the level up and the tone up just a bit. This can kind of give some high-end grit and bite to this, and I'm pushing the amp. Instead of using the drive pedal to make the drive, I'm actually using the level to drive into that amp to then push that amp a little bit harder. 5150s can take a significant amount of input gain really well, and so because of that, I like to use it. This specific overdrive is modeled after a tube screamer, and it specifically is really good at tightening up the low end. There is a lot of low end in this guitar tone, and because of that, it can get slightly overwhelming, but tightening up that low end a little bit, specifically with that tube screamer, can help a ton. So listen specifically to the low end as I turn the drive on and off. Notice how it doesn't make the low end completely disappear, it just tightens it up just a little bit. Let's go ahead and look at our EQ here as well. We'll turn the drive on and off and we'll pay attention to the low end specifically, and notice how the low end is still there, it just tightens up just a little bit. That specific frequency here, right around that like 110 hertz, you can see starting to poke through a little bit. And with that drive, it keeps it a lot more consistent and kind of pushes it down in just a little bit. Pay attention one more time to that specific frequency. Once again, I am fixing some of these EQ moves that could be done at an EQ, but at the actual guitar tone level. This is a way better option because I'm going into the amp with this guitar tone. It's making that low end a lot more consistent. If I was to add an EQ here and cut that specific frequency, well, it's only flubbing and having that low end flub in certain areas and not in every single note. And so then I'd have to use dynamic EQ to make up for that, but I'm still not shaping the overall guitar tone. So because I wanted to tighten up the low end of that guitar a little bit because there was a decent amount there, I decided to use a tube screamer because that's part of the job of what a tube screamer can do, is tighten up that low end. I'm just going to reiterate this again. I am making even mixing decisions at the guitar tone level. It seems like a novel concept to some people. Sometimes people just throw on some sort of guitar tones and they just go wild with mixing afterwards, trying to fix it later. And trust me, I know because I used to be there. But when you get really good guitar tones at the source, you can do just about nothing else and be completely fine. Now we've tightened that up. I feel really good about that. Next is there is a lot of that high-end frequency content that I wasn't really enjoying, and anything below about 100 hertz was starting to have a little bit of an issue. And so I decided to go ahead and I added some EQ here. So let's go ahead, turn the EQ on and off. So I'm cutting around 6,000 hertz because there's a lot of that high-end content that I am filling out in other areas, which I'll show you in just a second. And I also have 250 hertz, which I was cutting just a bit. And then anything about below 100 hertz, I felt was a little bit too much. There was that area from 100 to 110 that I felt really confident about. And so let's go ahead and take a listen. So I'm not really hearing too much of a difference other than some low flub content is getting out of the way when I boost this up by about 100. And so it felt pretty good. And then there's that high end. And once again, I dial this up or back depending on the song and depending on all the other layers that I have and along with it. It's just how it works sometimes depending on the specific song that I'm doing. In this case, bringing it down to 6,000 hertz felt really nice. But in some other cases, bringing it up a little bit can be helpful too, depending on how much of that high end sizzle I'm really looking for. So right around that 6,000 seemed to be a pretty good sweet spot for me. I know that seems like a lot, and I'm cutting out a lot, but once again, there's some other things in the mix that I'm blending along with the guitars to get it to sit well. And then, of course, there was like no reverb or delay that I had on this at all, and so it's doing absolutely nothing. And that is essentially the guitar tone. Now, I'll bring this back into the mix, and then I'll show you what I'm adding along with it. So, of course, same guitar tone on the left and the right. Then I'm bringing it in with the bass. And then I also have one extra thing, which is the synth magic maker. And that synth specifically is just Serum, and I'm running a patch out, so I am compressing some of the low end, anything below about 205 hertz, and anything above that is going to that Nolly preset that we made earlier. If you want an entire video about that, I'll leave a link to this in the description down below to an entire video of a walkthrough on that. And if you are interested, I do have a full session breakdown from one of my songs. You can get the stems for free, and I will go through the entire session breakdown process so you can actually see everything in depth, the drums, the bass, the guitars, all the plugins I'm using for everything. It's completely free. Links to that will be down in the description below. I'll leave it right at the top. Let's get into how this is blending in with the guitars as well. So at the bass, the synth, and the guitars all sound like this together. And then in the context of the mix, now, if I wanted to enhance these guitars just a little bit more, because this is just about a final mix, but I do want to go just a little bit above and beyond and show you what I would do at the final process. I really don't need a whole lot here. The guitars don't need a whole lot of EQ. There's not a whole lot that's going on that's really standing out to me, but I do like adding a bit of saturation, specifically tube saturation to these mixes. So let me go ahead and grab some tube. And I'm using London Virtual Tubes Collection from Slate Digital. It doesn't have to be this one, but some sort of tube saturation. And then I just want to bring up the saturation a little bit until I'm starting to get some thickness, specifically in the low mids. Listen to how that sounds. So it's adding a bit of brightness, bringing it a little bit more forward, and adding some of that low, mid, and mid content that I'm really enjoying. It's just saturation. Really kind of bringing that up a bit. Love it. And it's just adding an extra bit of sizzle and almost a teensy-weensy bit of chaos that I like to see in my guitar tones, specifically during these breakdowns, which I really like. And then I'm going and I'm adding a limiter after this. And specifically, I just want to make sure that I am bringing some of those high peaks down just a touch. I don't want to use compression necessarily because these guitars are already pretty naturally compressed when you run them through the amp and the saturation, distortion. The saturation naturally compresses the signal. And so after the guitars are already rendered out, they are already a pretty massive brick form of a wave. Let's take a look at what that actually looks like in the context here. So you can see here that this is pretty dynamic. You can see that there's the specific flux of the string, and you can see all the dynamics. These guitars are extremely dynamic because what you're seeing right now is the DI, the direct in of this guitar. But if I go ahead and I want to render this down to its own spot, so I'll bounce to new track, look at what it looks like now. Completely compressed, so flat. This is way more dynamic because you're actually seeing the DI, but then it goes through the amp, everything that we just did, and it's compressing it down by a lot. Now, there are some little spikes and things up in here, but they're very short, and grabbing it with a limiter is going to be a better result than a compressor, at least that I found. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go on my bus again. So the saturation's on the bus. I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab my limiter, and I just want to bring the threshold down until I'm getting just a dB-ish of gain during those bigger sections, specifically during like the peaks here and going into that breakdown specifically. You can see how it's starting to level that specific section out and bringing it down. So just tightening it up just a bit. So with the bus processing off, this is what the guitars sound like. And then on. Go work on your guitar tones, make sure that your guitar is intonated, you're doing your performance properly, and you really work on your guitar tone, and you make guitar tone decisions almost like you're making mixing decisions, because you will get a way better mix at the end of it. If you have these crazy EQ moves all over the place, definitely start back at the beginning and start getting a great guitar tone at the source. That entire session breakdown is completely free. Links to that will be down in the description below. I'll leave it right at the top. You can download that completely for free.